Bruce Lee. The name alone conjured images of impossible speed, unyielding power, and a philosophical depth that transcended mere combat. To the world, he was an enigma wrapped in a whirlwind, a martial arts god whose every movement defied gravity and expectation. His legend was not merely built on cinematic triumphs, but on a profound, almost spiritual mastery of his craft. People whispered tales of his one-inch punch, his blinding kicks, and his uncanny ability to anticipate an opponent's every move. He seemed invincible, a figure carved from myth, destined to forever stand unchallenged at the pinnacle of martial arts. Yet, beneath the veneer of invincibility, lay a man burdened by the immense pressure of his own legend. There were subtle hints, fleeting glances of weariness in his eyes, a quiet intensity that spoke of personal struggles fought far from the public gaze. The weight of expectation, the constant demand for perfection, was a heavy mantle, even for a dragon. He was human, after all, susceptible to doubts and the quiet anxieties that plague even the greatest of men. The world saw the icon. Only a select few glimpsed the man behind the myth, grappling with the relentless pursuit of self-mastery. It was into this world where Bruce Lee's shadow loomed so large that a new challenger emerged, a force of nature known only as the Goliath. He was a mountain of a man, reportedly weighing 130 kilograms, with a reach that seemed to stretch across the ring and a reputation for undefeated brutality. His fights were not displays of skill, but rather exhibitions of raw, unadulterated power, leaving opponents battered and broken. Public skepticism, however, was high. How could any mere mortal truly threaten Bruce Lee, the legendary figure who had redefined martial arts? The idea seemed almost laughable, a fleeting curiosity against the backdrop of Lee's established greatness. Many dismissed Goliath as a crude brute, lacking the finesse and philosophy that made Lee truly formidable. But then came the first encounter, not in a ring, but in the hushed, almost reverent atmosphere of a martial arts exhibition. Lee, ever the dignified master, stood observing a demonstration when Goliath, with his imposing frame, deliberately positioned himself to block Lee's view. Their eyes met across the crowded room, a tense, silent stare-down that seemed to stretch time itself. There was no aggression, no overt challenge, yet an electric current of unspoken history crackled between them. It was more than just a clash of titans. It was a recognition, a deep-seated connection that hinted at something far more profound than a simple rivalry. A ripple of murmurs spread through the onlookers as whispers began to circulate. The Goliath, it turned out, was not just some random contender. He was a ghost from Lee's past, a shadow of a former self. Years ago, he had been a student under Lee's tutelage, eager to learn, but tragically lacking in the discipline and philosophical understanding that Lee championed. He had been cast out, not for lack of strength, but for his inherent brutality, for his inability to grasp the true essence of martial arts beyond mere physical dominance. This revelation added a layer of profound gravity to the impending confrontation. This was not just a fight for supremacy. It was a reckoning, a battle against a past mistake, a testament to the enduring consequences of choices made long ago. The air grew thick with anticipation, no longer just for a spectacle, but for a deeply personal drama poised to unfold. Long before he became the Goliath, a hulking shadow of a man, he was merely a young student, brimming with raw, untamed energy. His name, then, was David, and his eyes, though often clouded by a fierce ambition, held a flicker of genuine admiration for the master. Bruce Lee, ever the patient and insightful teacher, saw the immense potential within David, a strength that could be harnessed for greatness, or, if left unchecked, could become a destructive force. Lee took David under his wing, recognizing the latent power, but also the inherent wildness that simmered beneath the surface. He attempted to instill in the young man not just the mechanics of combat, but the profound philosophy that underpinned Jeet Kune Do. Lee spent countless hours trying to teach David restraint, the delicate balance between power and control, the wisdom of knowing when not to strike. He spoke of the flow of water, the emptiness of the cup, the importance of harmony and self-awareness. For Lee, martial arts was a path to self-discovery, a discipline of the mind as much as the body. He encouraged David to delve into introspection, to understand the roots of his aggression, and to channel it into something constructive. But David, with his imposing physique and an almost insatiable hunger for dominance, struggled to grasp these deeper meanings. His mind was singularly focused on the physical, the undeniable thrill of overpowering an opponent. He saw philosophy as a distraction, a weakness even, something that diluted the pure, exhilarating force of a strike. The nuances of Lee's teachings often bypassed him, landing instead on the fertile ground of his raw, unyielding aggression. The fateful incident arrived with the brutal swiftness of an uncontrolled strike. During a sparring session, meant to be a controlled exchange of techniques and a test of discipline, David unleashed his full, unbridled power. A fellow student, lighter and more agile, but equally dedicated to Lee's principles, fell to the mat, severely injured. The crack of bone, the sudden gasp of pain, echoed through the dojo, silencing the usual sounds of training. David stood over his fallen opponent, breathing heavily, a grim satisfaction etched on his face, oblivious to the horror he had just inflicted. He had defied every rule, every lesson of restraint and respect that Lee had tirelessly preached. The air in the dojo grew thick with a palpable tension. Bruce Lee, his face a mask of profound disappointment and sorrow, approached David. His voice, usually calm and measured, carried an uncharacteristic weight as he explained the gravity of David's transgression. This was not merely a physical injury, it was a betrayal of the core tenets of their art, a desecration of the sacred space of learning. With a heavy heart, Lee made the painful decision. David was expelled. It was a moment that tore at Lee's own soul, a failure not of David's strength but of Lee's inability to tame the darkness within him. The master had cast out his student, not for weakness, but for an excess of uncontrolled power. As David was escorted from the dojo, his face contorted not with remorse but with a burning humiliation and a seething rage. He felt betrayed, misunderstood, convinced that Lee had simply been afraid of his true potential. A dark vow of revenge whispered beneath his breath, solidified in his heart. He would return, not as a student, but as an adversary, to prove that brute force, unfettered by philosophy, was the ultimate dominion. The challenge, when it finally arrived years later, was not merely a sporting event, but a deeply personal declaration of war. It was David's quest for vengeance, a settling of old scores, and for Bruce Lee, it was a confrontation with a past he had hoped to transcend. The stage was set for a battle far more profound than any mere fight. Bruce Lee, the legendary figure, found himself ensnared in a profound internal conflict. The challenge from Goliath was not merely a physical threat, it was a ghost from his past, a stark reflection of a decision he had made years ago. Fighting a former student, one he had personally cast out, felt like a battle against a part of himself, stained by actions he could not undo. The weight of that expulsion, the painful memory of David's raw, untamed aggression, now pressed heavily upon his conscience. He often found himself lost in thought, his gaze distant, replaying the fateful incident in his mind, searching for an alternative path he might have taken. Was there another way to guide David, to temper his ferocity with wisdom, or was his path always destined for this collision? His family, especially his devoted wife Linda, observed his quiet turmoil with growing concern. She knew Bruce better than anyone, recognizing the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the deepening lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and internal strife. Linda saw beyond the public persona of the invincible master. She saw the man burdened by responsibility, by the very principles he lived by. She often found him in his study, poring over ancient texts, not for new techniques but for philosophical solace, for answers to questions that transcended physical combat. She would gently place a hand on his shoulder, offering silent support, her presence a calming anchor in the storm of his mind. She understood that this fight was not just about winning, it was about confronting a personal failure, a wound that had never fully healed. The media, ever eager for a sensational story, latched onto the narrative with predatory zeal. Headlines screamed, painting Bruce Lee as the aging master, perhaps past his prime, facing down a monstrous protégé he himself had created. The public, while still largely supportive of Lee, began to whisper, to speculate. Could the legend truly overcome such a formidable, vengeful force? The media circus only amplified the pressure, transforming a personal vendetta into a global spectacle, adding layers of expectation and doubt to Lee's already heavy burden. Despite the emotional toll, Lee's dedication to his craft remained unwavering. His training sequences became even more intense, a relentless pursuit of perfection that pushed his body and mind to their absolute limits. Mornings began before dawn, with shadow boxing in the cool, silent air, each movement precise, fluid, a dance of deadly grace. He meticulously refined his techniques, focusing on speed and economy of motion, knowing that against Goliath's sheer power, every fraction of a second, every inch of movement, would count. Yet, beneath the rigorous discipline, a growing weariness was discernible. It wasn't physical exhaustion, but a deeper, spiritual fatigue that gnawed at his resolve. Meanwhile, Goliath's preparations were a brutal antithesis to Lee's philosophical approach. His training was a savage regimen of pure power, raw strength, and relentless aggression. He lifted immense weights, hammered heavy bags with bone-shattering force, and sparred with multiple partners, often leaving them battered and bruised. He openly mocked Lee's teachings, scoffing at the idea of inner peace or spiritual enlightenment. For Goliath, victory was about dominance, about overwhelming force, and proving that Lee's weak philosophy had led to his downfall. He envisioned not just a win, but a complete, humiliating subjugation of his former master. Even among Lee's closest confidants, doubts began to surface. James, a longtime friend and training partner, voiced his concerns one evening, his brow furrowed with worry. "Bruce," he began cautiously, "this isn't just another opponent. This is David. He knows your moves, your tells, and he carries a hatred that fuels him beyond reason. Are you truly ready for that kind of malice?" Lee listened, his face impassive, acknowledging the truth in James's words. The emotional stakes were higher than any fight he had ever faced. Then, a chilling message arrived, slipped under the dojo door, unsigned and anonymous. It was a crude drawing of a broken dragon, Lee's iconic symbol, with a dagger plunged through its heart. The accompanying text was brief, menacing. "Some fights are rigged before they begin. Be warned, Master. You taught me well." The threat, subtle yet unmistakable, hinted at foul play, a setup orchestrated to ensure Lee's defeat. It added another layer of sinister intrigue to the impending confrontation, suggesting that Goliath's vengeance might extend beyond the ring, encompassing forces far more insidious than a mere physical challenge. The stage was now set, not just for a fight, but for a potentially deadly conspiracy. The night of the fight descended upon the city like a heavy, expectant cloak. The air thrummed with an almost palpable energy, a mixture of anticipation and dread that seeped into every corner of the colossal arena. Thousands had gathered, their collective breath held, ready to witness what promised to be either a triumphant reaffirmation of a legend or a devastating fall from grace. Flashing lights cut through the smoky haze, illuminating banners emblazoned with both Lee's iconic dragon and Goliath's menacing, stylized fist. The grandeur of the spectacle was undeniable, a macabre ballet of impending violence. Bruce Lee's entrance was met with a deafening roar, a tidal wave of adoration that washed over him from every tier of the stadium. He walked with his customary grace, a picture of focused intensity, yet a flicker of apprehension, almost imperceptible, danced in his eyes. It was a fleeting shadow, quickly masked by his disciplined composure, but it was there, a testament to the immense pressure he carried. He acknowledged the crowd with a slight nod, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces, searching perhaps for reassurance, or simply steeling himself for the battle ahead. Then came Goliath. His entrance was a stark contrast, a deliberate display of brute force and intimidation. He lumbered into the arena, a mountain of muscle, his face a mask of cold, unwavering malice. The crowd's cheers for him were less enthusiastic, more a nervous murmur, punctuated by scattered boos. He didn't acknowledge anyone, his eyes locked onto Lee across the ring, a predatory stare that promised unforgiving retribution. He flexed his massive arms, a silent declaration of his intent to utterly dominate, to dismantle the man who had once been his master. A collective gasp went through the arena as the referee stepped into the center of the ring. It was Master Chen, a formidable figure in the martial arts world, but also a long-standing if subtle rival of Li's. His past professional disagreements with Li were well known within inner circles, adding an unexpected layer of unease to an already tense atmosphere. Chen's presence, with his stern, unyielding expression, felt less like a guarantee of fair play and more like another hurdle strategically placed in Li's path. The anonymous threat about a rigged fight echoed ominously in the minds of those who knew the history. The opening bell shrieked, a piercing sound that sliced through the charged silence. The first round began, a brutal dance of contrasting styles. Li, a whirlwind of speed and precision, weaved and darted, his movements fluid as water, his strikes like lightning. He aimed to exploit Goliath's massive size, to wear him down, to find the gaps in his seemingly impenetrable defense. Goliath, in turn, was a relentless force, a battering ram of raw power. He lunged and swung, each blow carrying the weight of a sledgehammer, designed to crush, to overwhelm. The arena erupted with every exchange, the crowd on the edge of their seats, mesmerized by the clash of titans. Midway through the round, a suspicious incident unfolded. As Li ducked under a wild swing from Goliath, a sudden blinding flash from the audience momentarily disoriented him. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but in that split second Goliath's elbow seemingly accidentally grazed Li's jaw. It wasn't a full blow, but enough to momentarily disrupt Li's rhythm, to make him stumble. Master Chen, the referee, was looking away at that precise moment, distracted by a minor commotion at ringside. He missed the subtle, yet impactful contact, and the fight continued, the incident brushed aside, unnoticed by most, yet leaving a faint, unsettling residue in the electric air of the arena. The seed of doubt, planted by the anonymous warning, began to sprout. The fight raged on, a brutal ballet of power and finesse, but the tide was turning. Goliath, fueled by a primal fury and seemingly boundless stamina, began to press his advantage. His blows, once wild and somewhat predictable, now found their mark with increasing frequency. Li, usually untouchable, was finding himself cornered, his evasive maneuvers less effective against Goliath's relentless assault. The crowd, initially roaring with every one of Li's lightning-fast strikes, now held its breath, a collective gasp escaping as Goliath landed a devastating blow. It was an uppercut, delivered with the force of a battering ram, catching Li squarely on the chin. The sound echoed through the arena, a sickening thud that reverberated in every spectator's chest. Li reeled, his head snapping back, his vision momentarily blurring. He stumbled, his legs threatening to give way beneath him. It was a sight few had ever witnessed, the legendary Bruce Li, visibly shaken on the verge of collapse. A collective groan swept through the stands, a wave of shock and disbelief washing over the once adoring crowd. This was not the invincible master they knew. This was a man struggling, his legendary composure cracking under the immense pressure. Goliath, seeing his opportunity, pressed forward, a cruel, triumphant sneer twisting his lips. "Remember this feeling, master?" Goliath's voice, a low growl, cut through the din of the arena, reaching Li's ears even amidst the ringing in his head. "This is what it feels like to be weak, to be cast aside. You taught me to fight, but you never taught me how to truly win." His words, laced with venom and years of festering resentment, were like daggers, piercing through Li's already compromised defenses. They spoke not just of physical pain, but of a deeper emotional wound, reopening the scar of Goliath's expulsion. The taunts fueled Goliath's rage, making his subsequent attacks even more ferocious, each punch a testament to his burning desire for vengeance. Then came the unthinkable. Another crushing blow, a brutal hook, sent Li sprawling to the canvas. He landed with a thud, his body momentarily still, his eyes unfocused. The arena plunged into a stunned silence, broken only by the sharp intake of thousands of breaths. The mighty Bruce Li knocked down. It was a moment of profound humiliation, a public dethroning of a legend, broadcast for the world to see. The image of the fallen master would be etched into the memory of every person present, a rare and painful crack in the facade of invincibility. Master Chen, the referee, moved with an almost deliberate slowness, beginning his count. 1, 2, 3. His eyes, usually sharp and impartial, seemed to linger on Li for a fraction of a second too long before flicking to Goliath, a subtle, almost imperceptible nod passing between them. At the count of 8, Li, with a Herculean effort, pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest, his face a mask of pain and grim determination. He was on his feet, but barely, swaying slightly, his guard low. Just as he regained his footing, Chen stepped between them, seemingly to check on Li. But instead of allowing Li a moment to recover, Chen gave Goliath a subtle, almost imperceptible signal to resume. Before Li could fully brace himself, Goliath was upon him again, a whirlwind of fists, catching Li off guard. The crowd roared its disapproval at the questionable timing, sensing the unfairness, but Chen merely waved them off, his expression unreadable. Li's inner monologue, usually a fortress of discipline and unwavering focus, began to falter. Doubt, a venomous serpent, began to coil in his mind. Had he misjudged Goliath's growth? Was this truly the end of his reign? The weight of the world, of his legacy, of every expectation ever placed upon him, pressed down, threatening to crush him completely. The humiliation of the knockdown, coupled with the referee's questionable calls, gnawed at his spirit, planting a seed of despair in the heart of the dragon. Yet, even as despair threatened to consume him, something stirred within Bruce Lee. A flicker, then a spark, ignited in the depths of his bruised and battered spirit. The canvas beneath him was not merely a symbol of his fall, but a stark reminder of the foundations upon which he had built his life. He remembered the countless hours of meditation, the philosophical texts he had devoured, the core tenets of Jeet Kune Do, adaptability, efficiency, and directness. This was not just about winning a fight, it was about upholding a philosophy, a way of life that transcended brute force and personal vendettas. A hazy image formed in his mind, cutting through the pain and the deafening roar of the crowd. It was Linda, his beloved wife, her eyes filled with unwavering belief. He heard her voice, clear as a bell amidst the chaos, echoing words of encouragement from a quiet morning before the storm. "Your true strength, Bruce Wayne," she had said, "lies not in your ability to strike, but in your spirit to rise, no matter how many times you fall." Her words were a balm to his wounded soul, a reminder that his legacy was not defined by a single match, but by the resilience he embodied. Then, through a momentary gap in the surging bodies of the crowd, his gaze landed on a small, familiar face. His son Brandon sat wide-eyed and anxious, mirroring the fear and hope of thousands. In that instant, the humiliation, the pain, the doubt, all receded. He was not just fighting for himself or for his reputation, but for the future, for the principles he hoped to instill in his child. A wave of renewed determination, fierce and unyielding, surged through him, banishing the last vestiges of despair. The dragon, though wounded, was far from defeated. He pushed off the canvas, his movement still stiff, but imbued with a newfound purpose. Goliath, sensing a shift but misinterpreting it as desperation, lunged forward with another wild, powerful swing. But this time, Lee was ready. He didn't meet brute force with brute force. Instead, he danced, a fluid, almost ethereal movement that belied his injuries. He began to change his strategy, abandoning the direct confrontation that had played into Goliath's strengths. He became water, flowing around the immovable object, adapting, anticipating. He remembered Goliath's impatience, his tendency to overcommit, the very flaws Lee had tried to correct years ago in the training hall. With each missed punch from Goliath, Lee found an opening, a small chink in the armor of raw power. He started to exploit these weaknesses with cunning and precision. A quick sidestep, a parry that redirected Goliath's momentum, a swift kick to a vulnerable knee. The tide, slowly but perceptibly, began to turn. The crowd, sensing the change, erupted anew, but this time with a surge of hope, a palpable shift in energy that crackled through the arena. Their legendary hero was not falling. He was rising, transforming, adapting right before their eyes. Lee moved with a renewed grace, His eyes now sharp and focused, his breathing controlled. He was no longer reacting. He was dictating the pace, drawing Goliath into a dance of his own making. He unleashed a series of precise, powerful strikes, not aimed at debilitating, but at disrupting, at unbalancing. A lightning-fast jab to the temple, followed by a low, sweeping kick that momentarily knocked Goliath off balance. Then a rapid-fire combination of punches to the body, each one finding its mark, surprising not only Goliath, but the entire audience. The monstrous challenger for the first time looked genuinely bewildered, his confidence beginning to waver under the relentless, strategic assault of the revitalized dragon. The final decisive moment arrived with an almost poetic inevitability. Lee, seeing the opening, the flicker of fear in Goliath's eyes, gathered every ounce of his remaining strength and channeled it into a single iconic strike. It wasn't a wild, desperate blow, but a meticulously calculated fusion of speed, power, and precision, a testament to a lifetime dedicated to perfecting his art. His foot, a blur of motion, connected with Goliath's solar plexus with a resounding thud that echoed through the stunned arena. The force was immense, not merely physical, but the culmination of philosophy, discipline, and an unyielding spirit. Goliath, the seemingly invincible giant, crumpled to the canvas, his massive frame hitting the floor with a tremor that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. He was defeated, not just physically broken, but his spirit of vengeance, his bitter rage, finally shattered against the unyielding will of his former master. A collective gasp, then an explosion of sound ripped through the arena. The crowd erupted, a tidal wave of cheers, shouts, and applause washing over the space. It was a roar of relief, a celebration of resilience, and an outpouring of awe for the legend who had stared defeat in the face and emerged triumphant. Lee, though visibly exhausted, stood tall, his chest heaving, but his eyes clear and resolute. The weight of the world, which had pressed down on him just moments before, had lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace. As the referee began the count, a hush fell over a small section of the crowd nearest the ringside. Instead of basking in the glory, Lee did something unexpected. With slow, deliberate steps, he walked towards the fallen Goliath. The referee paused his count, unsure how to react. Lee extended a hand, not in triumph, but in a gesture of profound empathy and forgiveness. It was an act that transcended the brutality of the fight, affirming his own deepest principles, the very lessons he had tried to impart years ago. Goliath, still gasping for air, looked up, his eyes meeting Lee's. In that gaze he saw not anger, but understanding, not superiority, but compassion. The humiliation he had sought to inflict on Lee now reflected back at him, but tempered with an offer of redemption. Slowly, painstakingly, the massive man reached out and grasped Lee's hand. The gesture was acknowledgement, a silent admission that true power lay not in brute force or vengeful ambition, but in the mastery of self, in the spirit of martial arts that Lee embodied. Humbled, Goliath nodded, a flicker of something akin to respect finally replacing the malice in his eyes. He had lost the fight, but perhaps in that moment he had found something far more valuable. Lee's closing thoughts, shared in a quiet moment later, resonated with a wisdom that transcended the spectacle of the fight. True victory, he mused, his voice hoarse but steady, is not merely overcoming an opponent. It is overcoming the self, the doubts, the fears. It is understanding that strength is not measured by the size of the man, but by the size of his spirit. Sometimes, the greatest battles are fought within, and the truest triumph is when we remain faithful to our principles, even when the world demands we compromise. And so, the enduring legacy of Bruce Lee was forged anew that night. He was remembered not just as a fighter whose speed and skill were unmatched, but as a philosopher who lived his creed, a human being who faced his own demons, his own past, and emerged with his humanity intact. The arena emptied, the cheers faded, but the indelible image of the dragon, standing victorious yet compassionate, extending a hand to his fallen adversary, would forever be etched in the annals of martial arts history, a timeless testament to the true meaning of a legend.